Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Trevor.
I wish I would meet you under better circumstances. It feels like I always see you after a mass shooting.
Yep.
It feels like there is always a mass shooting to see you after. You tweeted after this event, now we're obsessing over whether the Nevada carnage was terrorism. If we decide it is, we'll mobilize untold resources. If not, nothing. Do you believe that, and what does that mean?
I absolutely believe that, and I'll tell you, it's the moment in the House of Representatives where you just want to set your own hair on fire, because here you are in the one space in America where 435 people could do an hour's work, 1 hour, and you'd pass stuff that 90% of Americans support, things like universal background checks. Wherever you buy a gun, we're going to check to make sure you're not a violent criminal or a terrorist. And instead, you know what we do? We stop talking for 10 seconds. That's what we offer to the people who have been so traumatized by the events in Las Vegas, the events in Sandy Hook, the events in Orlando. It's just the drumbeat of that impotence and that silence, I'll tell you, it just makes my head explode.
This is the second time you refused to participate in the moment of silence. Some people would say, Congressman, you're disrespecting the victims. Why wouldn't you participate in the moment of silence that Congress is holding?
Anywhere else, in a Rotary Club, at a baseball game, do a moment of silence. If you're in the one room where you could start fixing this problem that no other country has, that is resulting in 35,000 or so Americans every single year dying, and what your answer is, let me just stop talking for 10 seconds. Oh, by the way, the flag at the top of our building, we're going to drop that down 20 feet. That's negligence. That's not honoring anybody. Honoring the victims would mean we're going to fix this.
Let's talk about the arguments around the discussion, because there are people who would say, Congressman, background checks wouldn't have prevented what happened in Las Vegas. This man was a legal gun owner. This is someone who had no record of anything. So what's the point of passing a universal background check?
Which is, you know, tool number 7 in the big toolbox of things that the opponents of any gun safety, and at the core of that, of course, is the NRA, have to distract us, to make us forget. You talked about it earlier. You know, this is not the moment to have a politicized discussion. It's funny, after 9/11, I don't remember us sitting back and saying, let's let a couple of days go by before we figure out who did this to us and how we ought to address it. You know, when a hurricane strikes an island, you don't let it, well, actually, I guess they did let a little bit of time go by, but you shouldn't let a little time go by. You know, this is the moment in which the American people are looking to us for an answer. And saying that this particular case wouldn't have been solved by things that we know would dramatically reduce gun violence, again, universal background check, things like putting limits on the kinds of weaponry that people can own. Look, I'm a Second Amendment guy myself. I support the Second Amendment. I actually like shooting firearms. I don't want to take away people's guns. I just think that we should check you out, that there should be limits on the guns that you have. And yes, we should take up mental health care. You know, 2/3 of the gun deaths in this country are suicides. That says there are a lot of distressed people out there that you ought to address, but you also ought to make it a little less easy for them to get the tool that will end their lives.
Don't you feel like that would always end up being the ultimate paradox for Americans, is that a lot of the time you are in the place where you say, I love the Second Amendment, I love shooting guns, I think we should have guns, but not certain guns and not guns for certain people. How do you define who those people are, and how do you define what the certain gun is? Because in America, most gun deaths come from the handguns. So someone would say, but it's not the assault rifle that causes the most deaths. Maybe it's the most gruesome example of people being killed because so many people can be killed at one time. But the handgun then becomes the culprit. So which guns do you try and take away?
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point. And the answer to your question is, that's my job. You know, I get elected and my colleagues get elected to draw those lines. And you're absolutely right. Assault weapons, which we tend to focus on in gruesome moments like this one, or in Sandy Hook and Orlando, they can cause a lot of damage very rapidly, as we saw in Las Vegas. But you're right. Again, the #1 source of gun deaths in this country is suicide.
Right.
And so, but I really object to the idea that, okay, we shouldn't focus on assault weapons. Australia in 1996 had a brutal, violent mass shooting, and they took action against these weapons that can kill a lot of people quickly.
Right.
And since then, they've really had no mass shooting incidents. So that's a part of it. But what it can't be is, it can't be like, well, you know, we shouldn't deal with assault weapons because most of the deaths around guns are suicides. We should also deal with that.
Right. But someone would say, Congressman, the difference between Australia and America is the Constitution says that we have the right to bear arms, and more importantly, we need these arms to protect us from the tyrannical government that may one day come for our guns.
Well, you know, that's sort of insane on the face of it, right? And, you know, it's worth reflecting on that, you know, instead of responding constructively to what we just saw by passing any of these bills that have 80–90% support amongst the American people, instead, right now, where I work, there's somebody having a conversation about what is the decent interval of time after a mass shooting in Las Vegas that kills dozens of people before we introduce a bill that makes it a lot easier for people to buy silencers.
Yes.
That's the discussion that is happening, and that's what should outrage the American people.
What's interesting, though, is you have a colleague who was shot during, it was a baseball or softball game.
Yeah, baseball.
It was a baseball game, and you had a colleague who was shot, and yet that same colleague is coming out on TV in an interview saying, yeah, but I still don't believe we should be restricting guns. I was saved by people with guns, and so I don't think we need to restrict this. How do you respond in that situation? What is your argument then?
You know, to see it happen today, to see the Speaker of the House standing there with Steve Scalise, my colleague and my friend, he's on crutches because he's suffering, you know, still recovering from this wound. And to hear the Speaker say, no, what we really need to focus on right now is a budget so we can get to tax reform. It's just surreal. But I guess Steve proved the case. He was saved by trained security professionals with guns. Nobody is saying they shouldn't have guns.
Right.
In fact, we're saying that they're the ones who, from a standpoint of security, should be doing the work. Not that, you know, if you're a, you were talking about Sean Hannity earlier, right? You know, if you've got a little bit of training and that guy opens up at me, well, I'm going to fix that. No, it's trained security officers with guns. But again, you know, there are lots of other countries that have lots of guns. Canada has a lot of guns, but nobody has this problem because we don't put, you know, any meaningful regulation on this stuff. And I object to the idea that people like me who simply want the same kind of controls that you would put on any other dangerous technology, a car, an airplane, that somehow this very lethal technology is exempt from the things that would stop people from dying.
So, realistically, where to from here? If you're in a place where after children have been shot, after members of Congress have been shot, after people at a music festival have been shot, if nothing gets done, then realistically, what could people do? How do you move that conversation forward?
Well, this is a case where the facts are on the side of those people who support reasonable restrictions, reasonable gun safety measures. The people are on the side. Many of these measures are supported by 80 and 90% of the population, including a lot of gun owners, most gun owners. So I think the best answer to your question is the kind of activism, the kind of mobilization that we saw, that we've seen for a long time, but that in particular that we saw that prevented the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. The attempts were there and there and there, and you know, people showing up at town hall meetings and saying, don't take away health care from 20 million people.
Right.
If people show up at town hall meetings to their Republican representatives and say, no, I'm not going to accept that this is not the right time to talk about this, people are dying, what are you going to do about it? If people show up at those town hall meetings, over time, opponents of any progress on this issue will necessarily listen.
Well, thank you so much for joining me again on the show. I appreciate it. Congressman Jim Himes, everybody.